Hello and welcome. Hello, good evening and welcome to another episode of Table Talk Live here at theunituk.com and of course broadcast live on YouTube and to our Google Plus community. We're delighted to have you here tonight, and we're also delighted to have two people in the room with us. Obviously my co-presenter Peter Brown is here this evening. Hello Peter, how are you?
Hello, good evening, people. Nice to see you all back again.
And of course, we have a special guest with us this evening. We have joining us from Italy, we have Torquil Dick-Erikson. Now, some of our viewers will have seen Torquil in the Corpus Juris debate, which took place in Cambridge in 1999. Now, this is available in our video library if you haven't seen it, and it's where Torquil debated against Professor Spencer, who was the British co-author of Corpus Juris, and Torquil won that debate by 39 votes to 4. Torquil, whose special interest is comparative criminal procedure, and he has extensive knowledge of the differences between the continental and Anglo-Saxon criminal law systems. Torquil, thank you for joining us tonight. We're delighted to have you here. How are you today?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, we're delighted that you could be here too. So, without further ado, folks, what I would say to you is just at the top of the screen, you can see how you can get in touch with us if you want to ask questions. If you post your questions to Twitter, then use @theunit and post your questions there, and I will keep a monitor on that on our Twitter account. Also, for those of you that want to use the telephone, then there is an SMS text telephone number. I have that telephone here in front of me, so if you want to text your questions that we can ask to the panel or put to Torquil, then please feel free to do that. So what I'm going to do first of all is, obviously tonight's show is about the changes to a whole number of legal and political frameworks as we go forward into the autumn, and I'm just going to start that off by asking Torquil to just give us a brief introduction to the Justice and Home Affairs issue, which is facing us quite soon. Could you tell us a little bit more about the JHA, please, Torquil?
Well, yes, the Lisbon Treaty made 135 Justice and Home Affairs measures, and it listed them and offered the UK the option of opting out of all of them in one block, and then opting back into any of them that it wanted to opt back into. Well, the government, evidently anxious to shore up its Eurosceptic credentials, decided to opt out of all 135. It exercised its right to the block opt-out some months ago, against the wish of the European Commissioner, Viviane Reding, the Commissioner for Justice, Security and Freedom, who said it would be crazy to do that. You'd have paedophiles and criminals running around your streets. But the government did it. And then they now, however, want to opt back in to 35 of these measures, which are in fact the most important ones. And they include the notorious European arrest warrant. And there is to be a parliamentary debate about this and a vote before the deadline for doing all this, which is the 1st of December. So after listening to this, listeners might want to write to their MP and express their opinion as to how their MP should vote.
Isn't it true, Torquil, that the ones that they haven't picked up on the odd 100 are mostly obsolete now anyway? So in effect, the 35 they're retaining is basically retaining the whole of the thing.
Well, yes. This is the analysis conducted by Gerard Batten, who is an MEP for the London area, and this is his conclusion. Yes, indeed.
So there's no
the 35 that the government wants to opt back into are the ones with the most meat on them.
So they're not Eurosceptic at all, basically. They're just going through a
Well,
charade.
no, it's a sort of game which makes them look rather more Eurosceptic, saying we're opting out of all 135 against the wishes of Commissioner Reding, but then they are, in fact, opting back into the crucial ones.
Yeah, in fact, that was a requirement, wasn't it? That if they wanted to get rid of some of them, they had to get rid of all of them initially.
Yes.
And
yes,
then
it's a sort of minuet dance, if you like,
Yeah.
that they do. But they don't. What is very interesting is that they don't have to opt back into any of them. The treaty leaves the UK free to stay opted out of all 135. And the fact that Cameron is insisting on opting back into them, into 35 of them, including the European arrest warrant, of which more later, I hope, the fact that he's insisting on doing that gives the lie to his stated intention and his proclaimed desire to claw back powers. Because to take back this power, he doesn't need to do any clawing at all. He can just say, okay, we're not having the European arrest warrant, thank you very much. And that is allowed under the treaty, but he doesn't want to do it. So he presumably really doesn't want to renegotiate anything.
Do there appear to be any political or economic arguments are there any social, political, economic arguments for why he would want to sign back into these opt-ins when he has the option to opt out of them? I mean, is there any rationalization behind that, Torquil?
Well, I cannot think of any presentable rationalization, but the unpresentable rationalization, I think, could be the following. Europe, in particular, Justice and Home Affairs, you see, means police and prisons. It means the means of physical coercion whereby the state can impose its will on the citizens against their will. Now, it is the means of control of the population. So anybody in who takes control of the Home Office or Justice and Home Affairs in a state controls that state, and so the power to put people in prison is once you have that power and that right, you are a state. If you're not a state and you try to lock people up, you're just a common kidnapper. But with the European arrest warrant, the European Union takes the power to lock people up, and in fact, on no evidence, as we will discuss later, and transport them across Europe. And this is, the ultimate power. So if Cameron says no to this, he will be seen in Brussels as being a traitor to the European cause, because the European cause, as they have often said on the other side of the channel, our own politicians have tried not to say it, the European cause is to create a single state called Europe. Helmut Kohl said it quite clearly. We want to have a country called Europe with a police force and a system of justice and the ability to put people in prison. So, yes.
Now we've tried to. I'm just going to refer to Peter, and you can comment. I'll call Peter to comment about his book. But up on our website at the moment, we've got an updated version of Democracy in a Federalized Europe. It's the latest release of the book. There's got a whole bunch of updates in it. But in that book, we highlight, or Peter has highlighted, this very thing about this creation of this state entity, this European superstate, which our political leaders in every party, it seems, have completely neglected to tell anybody that, and in actual fact create the impression that that's not. They still want to create this illusion that it's about jobs, that it's about economy, that it's about trade, and about all of these things. But just that one example there, once again, shows this massive handover of independent sovereign control to a third party. Now, we had Rodney Atkinson come on our show a month or so ago, and we were debating there whether such acts as these are actually constitute an act of treason in deliberately handing away power. Peter, what are your thoughts? I mean, you've looked at this, this creation of this single entity European superstate. What do you think about what Torquil's just said?
Well, just going back to that, Theresa May says that she and the Metropolitan Police considered opting back in will make it easier to control criminals. But what they're actually saying is that they've been so totally inept up to now in getting rid of people or getting them back, they're now giving away our sovereignty just so they can do it easily, which is not good for the people. It really is not. But the whole European superstate thing it's become a juggernaut now. It's just rolling faster and faster, and I don't think people fully understand just how far it's gone. A lot of the legislation is coming out, and it's hidden. I should imagine most people by now are aware of the lack of democracy in Europe. The only elected people are the MEPs, but they have no teeth. They're not allowed to propose legislation at all. They're there just to tick the boxes and sign it off. They're basically no more effective than our House of Lords in actually producing legislation. So it's all down to the commissioners. And what's actually happening, some very nasty pieces have come through, for instance, that the EU now allows the death penalty all over again. And that was slid under the MEP's nose for signature as a footnote to a footnote in a document. They never even saw it, and they signed for it.
This was an amendment to the ECHR, the the European Commission on Human Rights, wasn't it? Which took place not too long after the Lisbon Treaty was signed. Is that correct, Peter?
4 months, in fact. But that, in fact, was the Charter for Fundamental Rights, but they run in tandem with the ECHR.
What are your comments on that, Torquil?
Well,
were you aware of this? Were you aware of these amendments that got put through, and what Peter's talking about?
Yeah, well, as regards to the death penalty, the European Convention on Human Rights was drawn up in 1950, before the EU itself began. The European Community, as it originally was, Economic Community, as it originally was, the Common Market, so-called. The European Convention on Human Rights is a creature of the Council of Europe, which has about 47 countries in it, including countries, I think, like Russia and Turkey and other countries further east. And it was drawn up in 1950 as an attempt to set some standards which would ensure that horrors like Nazism and fascism shouldn't happen again. In 1950, it was considered fairly acceptable in most democratic Western countries. There was the death penalty. And in fact, it doesn't ban the death penalty as such. I mean, Britain had the death penalty. It hanged murderers. France had the death penalty. They used the guillotine. And most other Western European countries did. The movement to actually abolish the death penalty wasn't really abolished in England until the 1960s, I think, and in France not, I think, until the 1970s, and other countries then followed suit. But so the fact of the death, I mean, it says people, have a right to life, Article 2. In the convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, have a right to life. But then it makes some exceptions. It does not constitute a violation of the right to life, I think it says, if you're sentenced to death after a due process of criminal trial, etc. And also if you happen to be killed in crowd control operations by the police. I mean, there are exceptions in the European Convention on Human Rights. It doesn't give the right to life as a complete absolute, or indeed as it later has tended to become.
So now you mentioned thereabouts, might be a good way for us to thread back actually to the European arrest warrant and the JHA in some ways. But you said thereabouts that if loss of life was through crowd control or through the police, and I know Peter and I have talked about this in the past because the law says something about riots and insurrection. So we must be talking now about, in this context, we're talking about a European-wide police force, whereby in such events such as crowd control, riot or insurrection, if a number of the crowd were to lose their lives in any circumstances, that wouldn't be a criminal issue, or wouldn't be a criminal problem.
I've actually got the text here, Rick. I can pull it up straight away. Yeah.
Yes, okay, yeah. If you could do that, Peter, and we'll have a look at that and examine this a little bit more. I'm just going to put you on to present, Peter. Hang on a moment. Present to everyone. There you go. If you put your screen share up again, Peter.
Yeah. Does that show?
Not yet. There we go. We've got it. There we are. We've got it. Okay, so so here we are. So this is Section 1, Rights and Freedoms of Article 2, and in here it says, number 2, deprivation of life shall not be regarded as inflicted in contravention of this article when it results from the use of force which is no more than absolutely necessary. A, in defence of any person from unlawful violence. B, in order to effect a lawful arrest or to prevent the escape of a person lawfully detained. Or C, in action lawfully taken for the purpose of quelling a riot or insurrection. So, Torquil, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it doesn't actually there sanction the death penalty. I was evidently, and it's not part of the European Convention.
Well, it does in the first.
Oh, does it?
Right to life.
I can't read. It's too small on my screen.
Okay. Everyone's right to life shall be protected by law. No one shall be deprived of his life intentionally, save in the execution of a sentence of a court following his conviction of a crime for which this penalty is provided by law.
Well, then I was right. Yes. So that is yes, that is it. In fact, I had read this in another many years ago, and I didn't quite remember. But yeah, indeed, I did remember. So yes, and then there are the other exceptions. Indeed, even if a prisoner is escaping, apparently you can shoot him dead. Well, in those days, in 1950, I mean, most countries felt, democratic countries thought that was fair and okay. But I wouldn't, think that to my mind, that is not the worst part of let us say the most insidious part of the European Convention on Human Rights. I mean, Article 6 is the one that is the one that we are concerned with when looking at the European arrest warrant. I don't know, can you put Article 6 on the screen?
I'm just seeing if I can do that, too. Well, hang on. How's that?
Aha.
Yes. Now,
hang on, I'll make that focused.
Yeah, let me just try and get as much of it in as possible.
Is it possible for me to enlarge?
I can.
But somewhere there it should say the phrase. Oh, hang on.
Let me just see if I can manipulate the page, Torquil.
Ah, yes, it's getting a bit bigger. A little bit bigger, and I'll be able to read it. There, yeah, that's okay. Now, can I scroll this down?
No, I can. I'll have to do it for you.
Oh, okay. It says, subsection 2, everyone charged with a criminal offence shall be presumed innocent until proved guilty according to law. Number 3, everyone charged with a criminal offence has the following minimum rights: to be informed promptly in a language which he understands and in detail the nature and cause of the accusation against him, to defend himself in person, to have examined witnesses against him, to obtain the attendance. Can you just go down beyond E?
Yep.
You'll go on to the next page, I think.
Page, yes.
Carry on down. No, back up again.
That is the last of it.
Oh, really? Hang on,
Yeah.
let's go back again to Article 6 and look at it more closely. The whole of it, please. The beginning, too. Yes, here we are. It's in subsection 1. In the determination of civil rights and obligations of any criminal, everyone is entitled to a fair and public hearing within a reasonable time by an independent and impartial tribunal established by law. Now, this is supposed to encapsulate the rights, because this was drawn up by British lawyers, we're told, in 1915. And this is supposed to encapsulate the rights that we have had for many centuries under habeas corpus. Habeas corpus, under habeas corpus, what happens in Britain is that after arrest, a person is by the next day or the next couple of days, or in cases of where the issue is possible terrorism, it used to be up to a maximum of 7 days. This has now been extended to 28 days, but only for those specific cases. But as a general rule, within a few hours, or at the most a couple of days, if you happen to be arrested on a Friday evening and there's no court hearing on Saturday or Sunday, by Monday morning you have to be brought into a public hearing of a magistrate's court in Britain, for where they charge you. Now, the charge in Britain, it has to be based on evidence which has already been collected before the arrest. Like in every detective novel, chapter 1 you have the crime, the dead body in the library with the dagger in its back. Then chapters 2 to 19, you have the detective coming and questioning people and poking around and gathering evidence. And in chapter 20, at the end of the book, he finds out who's done it, and he gets them all into the library again and points the finger and says it's you and tells everybody why. But on the continent, it's the other way around. The first thing the investigators do is that they put all the suspects in prison, and then they interrogate them, and they hope that way to find the evidence of guilt. And they can keep them in prison for many, many months. In fact, under the Corpus Juris proposal, which is supposed to be a resume of all the continental systems, in the EU at least, they can keep the suspect in prison for 6 months, renewable for 3 months at a time. This is Article 23G in Corpus Juris. And they can renew the period for 3 months at a time, for an unspecified number of times. And this is all done by the investigating judge, who is the European Public Prosecutor, and his colleague, the Judge of Freedoms. In a country like Italy, these are two characters who work in tandem on case after case. So the Judge of Freedoms is supposed to be a third party, a restraining influence on the prosecutor, an impartial tribunal. But suppose.
Isn't it true, though, Torquil, that at the end of these umpteen months of investigation, they can just tell you to go home with no charges?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You see, they during these long, Andrew Symeou, which is the best known case of the European arrest warrant, but there are many others, was kept in a Greek prison for 11 months. And after 11 months, he had his first public hearing. The trouble with the reason why we have mutual recognition, which is the basis for the European arrest warrant, is this was an idea of Jack Straw's, which he produced at the conference in Tampere in 1999, because it was pretty evident that Corpus Juris, the single system for the whole of Europe, which would abolish trial by jury, habeas corpus, no double jeopardy, it was totally unacceptable for the British.
Perhaps you can explain what double jeopardy is, Torquil.
Double jeopardy means that the prosecution cannot appeal against an acquittal. So you can't be tried twice on the same charge. But on the continent, they can, and they often do appeal against an acquittal, and so you have another trial.
There's an example of that in the e-book, actually.
There's an example of that in the famous case in Perugia of Amanda Knox and her boyfriend. They were convicted. You may remember the case of the British student Meredith Kircher, who was found killed with her throat slit in a house which Amanda Knox was also flatmate. And Amanda Knox was arrested and accused of having taken part in the killing, and kept in prison for Amanda Knox is an American student there, as Meredith was at I think the University for Foreigners there, where people go to learn Italian. And they kept her in prison for 2 years, and then they convicted her at first instance. She appealed against the conviction, and on appeal she was acquitted. But the prosecution was not happy with the acquittal, and they appealed against the acquittal. And so it went up to the Supreme Court of Cassation, which said that indeed that the trial hearing where she'd been acquitted was a bit dubious, and so they had to have a new trial all over again, which they're still having, I think, in Florence, in another district. And I think this is probably why the Americans will refuse to extradite her if she's convicted at the end of this third trial, because the Americans say, once you've been acquitted, that is the end of the story. Like in Britain, you cannot be tried, the defense can appeal against a conviction, but the prosecution is not allowed to appeal against an acquittal. Because if it were allowed to, then they could go on and on until they got the answer they wanted. And everyone would be at the mercy of persecution, which would never stop.
So I'm busy writing notes down here whilst trying to pick my jaw up off the table, actually, because I'm rather stunned at what you've just said. Let me just see if I can put this back in layman's summaries and see whether it makes sense. So what we're saying is that under Anglo-Saxon criminal legal system, we have habeas corpus, and with the exception of one or two exceptions for terrorism, if we are suspected of being involved in a crime, the police can arrest us, but we have to be presented to a public hearing where the evidence has to be put forward within 7 days.
Well, usually it's 2 or 3 days, but yes.
Yeah, so within 7 days.
A matter of days. Let's say it's a matter of days.
Within a matter of days. So that's our system. So we know. So if we are accused of something or we find ourselves in that situation, we know that there is a fairly finite time that we've got to go through the stress and the anguish and the anxiety of that. What we're saying.
Can I just point out there are 2 points in habeas corpus which I think are worth looking at.
Yes.
One is the fact that within a few days of arrest you have to have a public hearing in front of an impartial tribunal. And the other is that at that hearing, the police, the investigators, the prosecution have to have already gathered enough evidence to show that there is a prima facie case to answer. That there is some serious evidence of guilt. They can't just do it on the basis of clues, or a suspicion, or a hunch, or intuition, or he looks guilty to me, that sort of thing, Whereas on the continent, you don't have the right to a hearing for months and months after your arrest, and there's no obligation on the prosecution to exhibit any evidence until the actual trial itself starts, which can be months or even years afterwards. So this is the big difference.
So what is there to stop me? Let's say, for example, that I'm living in south of France, and I decide to accuse the butcher up the road, or whoever it might be, of I don't know, assaulting somebody or killing somebody or something like that. that person, just on that say-so, I mean, reporting that evidence to the police could then go out, if they so wished, arrest that person, hold them, whilst they then go about this process of trying to gather evidence to find out whether there was a crime. Is that what you're saying?
Well, certainly if you yourself are a criminal. I can't tell you very much about France, although the system is very similar to the Italian, but I can tell you what happens in Italy.
Right.
When they are having terrorism and mafia and all sorts of other big criminal problems, they passed some legislation whereby, yes, indeed, if you yourself are just somebody walking in off the street, then they might believe you or they might not, and they might proceed against the person you are denouncing or not. But if you are yourself a criminal and you denounce the butcher up the road as your accomplice, then they will most certainly go after him and arrest him and keep him in prison, and you as well, until a certain time limit, which is measured in months or years, according to the seriousness of the crime. Yes, indeed, that is enough. That is a clue. In fact, there was the famous case in the 1980s of a TV game show host who was accused of being a member of the Camorra, the Neapolitan Mafia. And the only witnesses against him were members of the Neapolitan Mafia. And one of them was a man who actually killed, disemboweled a fellow prisoner and ate bits of his entrails raw. He was called Animale, which means the animal. And none of the defending lawyers dared say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, of course you don't have juries, can we believe the evidence of a cannibal? And the man who was prosecuting said the pre-trial investigation in this case, it was divine. This man, actually, the prosecutor, just recently, 30 years after the event, said he rather regretted having conducted that case in the way he did. But meanwhile, Enzo Tortora, the TV game show host, who was very popular, and everybody, especially everybody's mother, loved his game shows, and he had 28 million viewers. He spent 3 years in prison. And then when he was acquitted in the end on appeal, he came out and was so upset by everything that he caught cancer and died shortly.
Yeah.
About 5 years after his arrest. But that is, yes. So indeed, yes, it is. They don't. Well, let us say the law says that in order to arrest someone and deprive them of their freedom, the judge who decides it has to have what they call serious and convergent clues. They don't say evidence. Well, actually, the Italian legal language doesn't really have a proper word for evidence. It's got a word for clue, indizio, and a word for proof, which is prova. But when they're talking about evidence, well, they have to say something like elements of proof. But it's not the same as actual concept of evidence, which is halfway between a clue and proof.
Going back to Torquil's story about double jeopardy, there is a case in the book of a young woman that was accused of some drugs-related offences more than 25 years ago.
Where
she
was
actually
this?
Acquitted in France. In France.
In France,
she
yes.
was acquitted. And then in her absence, the prosecution appealed and had the conviction upheld. Now, some 18 years later, she was arrested in Spain, where she'd been to see her sick father. The Spanish authorities arrested her, but because of the length of time between the alleged offence and her arrest, they let her go. But as soon as she landed back in England, the Metropolitan Police arrested her. She eventually went before the courts here, and they said that it's totally unfair, this length of time being before anything's done about it, and therefore quashed her extradition. But the fact remains, because France refuses or has failed to cancel that arrest warrant, she cannot leave the country.
Yes, yes.
It's a ludicrous situation.
So where we are now, just coming back to where we began with this and talking about these 30 or so re-opt-ins from the 130 or so veto opt-outs that we went for with the JHA. So what we're saying here then is that one of these opt-outs being the European arrest warrant, by opting back into that, if David Cameron and the government opts back into that, what we'll actually be doing is giving the European legal system the right to come here into Britain and to exercise corpus juris on our soil over and above our legal system of habeas corpus. No. Is that right?
No, that will be taken back, I believe.
Well, it's not habeas corpus is a part of our legal system. Corpus juris means body of law, and is the name that they gave to this embryo criminal code and code of criminal procedure, which they presented in Spain at a seminar. The Commission presented it in a seminar where I happened to be amongst those attending, because I was invited over in the Italian delegation by somebody who had a gap, and I went along. And so corpus juris is this embryo. I actually have a copy of it. Yeah, which I can show people.
Incidentally, Rick, am I still the main picture?
This is it's initially supposed to be. So it's not quite correct to compare corpus juris to habeas corpus. Corpus juris is a sort of resume, if you like, of the Napoleonic inquisitorial system, which is used on the continent. 800 years ago, our paths diverged. In Britain, in England, we had Magna Carta. On the continent, they got the Inquisition. It was exactly at that time, the beginning of the 13th century, that the Pope here in Rome set up the machinery for the Holy Inquisition. It was Pope Innocent III. And when he found out about Magna Carta, and I have this on the authority of a very important Italian professor, Italo Mereu, who wrote this very important book, History of Intolerance in Europe, and the subtitle is To Suspect and to Punish. Right. It's a history of the Inquisition. Now, he wrote very rude letters to the English bishops and abbots who had signed Magna Carta. And in fact, something I want to say, and I'll seize this opportunity if I may of saying it, is that the celebrations of Magna Carta, which the government is planning for next year, so far does not seem to be aware of the fact that Magna Carta has no validity once you cross the English Channel. Nobody there knows anything about it, really. And they certainly, the whole tradition there is very different. So this is the to just return, if I may, to those words in the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yes.
The problem there is that they say you have a right to a public hearing in a reasonable time, but they don't say what a reasonable time is. For us in England, it is a matter of days, but in Italy, in Turkey, in other countries, and in corpus juris, it's a matter of months, which can indeed drag on sometimes into years before you have any public hearing. So this is why the European Convention on Human Rights is a very thin blanket. When the British lawyers drew it up in 1950, they had to adopt a very sort of vague term of reference, because if they'd been more precise and said within days, then none of the continental countries would have been able to sign it.
Rick, time goes on. Shouldn't we be talking about the Treaty of Welsum now and Article 222?
Well, I was going to ask that very question, really. I wanted to sort of, I wanted to come back. We perhaps will look some more at this European arrest warrant, but what we've essentially said is that if this goes ahead, then people from Britain under this European arrest warrant can be arrested, deported out onto the continent, and held for extensive periods of time without any prima facie evidence.
Yes, that is correct. Not only that, but the European Public Prosecutor who is being set up in the EU, although Britain has decided not to take part in it. But the European Public Prosecutor, which is the centerpiece of the Corpus Juris project, will nevertheless be able to arrest people in Britain unless we also reject the European arrest warrant. And he can do this because there's an article in Corpus Juris, which will be his handbook, and on which Britain will have no right to say anything because we won't be a part of the European Public Prosecutor. It'll be done under enhanced cooperation by a number of EU states, but not with Britain will not be included among them. He will be able to instruct a national prosecutor in one of the countries that has accepted him to issue a European arrest warrant. So, say, the European Public Prosecutor will not be able to arrest people directly in Britain, but he can order a Belgian prosecutor, say, to write out a European arrest warrant. This will arrive in Worcestershire or wherever in Britain where the person they want to arrest is, and the local police will simply have to execute it. And the fact that it's been ordered by the European Public Prosecutor will not be grounds for rejecting it, because it won't be apparent on the piece of paper itself. So this is another thing. You know, Parliament's opt-out will be completely sidestepped.
Yeah, the whole thing may become a moot point anyway, because the Lisbon Treaty basically has given the legal basis for a federal Europe, and with MVQ coming in at the end of the month, the UK will have no vetoes to stop the federal Europe unless we get out of it.
Well, yes.
In which case we will become part of that Corpus Juris system anyway. We must get our politicians to get us out of the EU, otherwise we are going to become part of this Corpus Juris.
Yes, yes. Well, the next election is going to be absolutely fundamental, and tomorrow's election will be very important too.
I hope people understand this. It's going to be our last chance to get away from it.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, Rick, I'll hand it back to you. You're not getting much chance of speaking this evening, are you?
No, well, in actual fact, I don't want to talk too much. You know, as I often say, you know, far better to sit quietly and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all the doubt. Right, so let's now. Last night we were talking about the preparing for this show, and I was quite astounded by this Treaty of Velsen that you mentioned, Torquil, because up until that point I'd never heard anything about the Treaty of Velsen at all. So could you tell us a little bit about this Treaty of Velsen and its implications for us here in the UK?
Yes, the Treaty of Velsen was signed the same day as the Treaty of Lisbon. By a number of states. So it wasn't really mentioned in there because it was overshadowed by the Treaty of Lisbon. But the Treaty of Velsen was signed by 5 or 6 countries in the European Union, and they set up a thing called the European Gendarmerie Force. They have their own website, so I mean this is not something I've imagined. You can go to eurogendfor.org, O-R-G, or .eu as it used to be. You'll revert back to .org and just look at it for yourself. You see, in continental countries like Spain, France, Italy, and others, the police are not organized like they are in England. In England, they're in 43 independent separate constabularies, although they've been trying to centralize a few functions. But on the continent, they're all controlled by a central government ministry. In Italy, for example, you have the Carabinieri, who are actually military police, but they have a barracks in every hamlet, every borough, all over the country. Their main task is to keep public order, and that's what they're trained for. They are military, they're lethally armed at all times, and they are there to basically, you know, one of their main functions is crowd control, rather than Sherlock Holmes sort of stuff, you know, the magnifying glass and the fingerprint. They do have scientific departments which do this, but they are, you know, their main activity is keeping public order. And
so let's just connect a
France,
dot a moment. I just want to connect a dot here for a moment because we've talked over a few things. So in this document, the amendments to the ECHR, which took place 4 months after the Lisbon Treaty was signed and the Treaty of Velsen was signed at the same time, Velsen instantiated Eurogen 4, and we've got some videos about Eurogen 4 in our video library. This ECHR amendment effectively says that if, loss of life through crowd control or insurrection, and the people that are managing the crowd control and insurrection are this lethally armed, military-trained police force called Eurogen 4, who are protected in law by the ECHR in times of insurrection and riot control. Is that a reasonable connection and summary to make, Torquil?
Yes, but I don't think there was a modification to the ECHR for this to happen. It was like that since the beginning. That's Section 2, Article 2. You have the Carabinieri in Italy. There are two other very major police forces. There's the tax avoidance police, called the Guardia di Finanza, the Finance Guard. And they're also militarized. They have tanks and dogs and helicopters and frogmen and everything. That's to do the Carabinieri. And they get sent abroad too. And then there's the actual Polizia di Stato, which is the state police. And they are also, and they're all distributed all over the country. In France, you have the Gendarmerie, which is similar to the Carabinieri. In fact, Gendarmerie means men-at-arms. And in Spain, of course, they have the Guardia Civil with those funny hats, which people who've been to Spain will recognize. So, and now these three, and together with the Dutch and the Portuguese, they didn't all amalgamate, of course, but together they founded the European Gendarmerie Force. And they have a barracks in northern Italy, in a town called Vicenza, which is actually also a NATO-based town near the base Aviano, and although it's nothing to do with the NATO base, and it's in a Carabinieri barracks, which they've been lent for the purpose, and there are several hundred of them there altogether, and they train and drill side by side. They've still got their national uniforms, but they wear a European Gendarmerie armband with the circle of yellow stars on the blue background. And they also, I think they've now got a uniform headgear. They haven't yet got round to designing a single uniform for them all to wear as they march down the high street. But
what you actually haven't said, though, Torquil,
yes,
is that these forces can be moved into a member state at the request of the government,
with the consent.
and you never get rid of them.
Well, yes. No, this is the point I'm coming to. First, I thought I ought to describe what sort of the animal looks like, and then what it can do. So, yes, they are indeed the ones who can, they very often do kill people on public order duties. There's been a big lot of dispute in Italy over football fans being shot dead when, there have been crowd control issues in stadiums, and so for football fans being shot, or other people being killed while in custody. Now, yes, the Treaty of Velsen sets this up, and it's very clear from the preamble that the European Gendarmerie Force, although it's not organized directly by the Commission, and it doesn't have all the member states participating in it, it's clearly a European Union initiative, although they try to pretend that it isn't.
I would beg to differ on that. I've not got your expertise, but looking at this Article 222, which came out on the 26th of July, again, hidden legislation, there was no press release or anything. According to this, the Part First clause asks the Union and its member states to act jointly in a spirit of solidarity. So it's not just those first half a dozen states that are involved. The Article 222 of the Lisbon Treaty now tells that all member states are involved and must make their best endeavours to be part of it. So
are you quoting it verbatim?
So I can pull up the document in front of me. Hang on.
Yes, that might be useful. Well, there are, at the moment, they've also been joined by the Romanian Gendarmerie. So there are now, I think, 6 countries which are, it's too small for me to read on my screen.
Let me see if I can pull it up again.
It's still,
No,
anyway, the point about the Treaty of Velsen is that, you know, of course, the big question that people in Britain will want to know is, will we ever see them on our high streets?
Yes, that's right.
This is the big question. And Article 6.3 of the Treaty of Velsen says that they can be deployed in a country, as it was before. I could read it and see the whole line, by the way.
Yeah, hang on, I'm just going to drop it down. So
just enlarge the screen again a bit.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Okay, and now enlarge the characters bit. Can?
There we are. That's the wording.
I still can't quite read it. It's still a bit too small.
Well,
the text a little bit bigger, as it was before. It was only there for a flash, though.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing dropping between the screen and the actual document.
Well, anyway, I've just finished what I was saying about the Treaty of Velsen.
Yes, do go on.
With the consent, Article 6.3 says, with the consent of a member of a state, of a country, they can be deployed in that country. Now, up to now, you see, the physical coercion of British citizens in Britain has had to be done physically. I mean, people being arrested, handcuffed.
We've lost. We've lost sound there.
Yeah, we might have lost Torquil.
We've got the whole text there, Rick. While we're waiting for him, as I said, this article appears to make it mandatory that all member states make themselves available for this Euro Gendarmerie effect. And the law actually goes on to say that at the request of the government, they can be invited in to the country to quell civil disorder. And once in the country, they come under the direct control of the Commission and the High Commissioner, which means, as Torquil mentioned earlier on, that the host government can no longer do anything about it. If the Commission decides that those Euro gendarmes are going to stay in the country, then that's what's going to happen. And these people are pretty nasty people. I read some months ago the GSG-9, the German force, who carry out a number of anti-hostage situations similar to the Essayist, they're that refined, have been training with the Euro Gendarmerie for a couple of years, and this was a couple of months ago. And I do not want to get on the wrong side of those people. Bearing in mind that a lot of people in Europe don't have a particular regard for the British, and we may well find ourselves in a very, very sticky situation if they're ever invited in. And bearing in mind also that the EU has disposed 2 governments, Greek and Italian governments. There's nothing to stop them putting a puppet government into this country and asking them to invite them in. It'd be perfectly legal, according to the new law.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and for us, that you know, that would be here in Britain just quite unbelievable, really, in the sense of that it would be so different and alien.
Am I back again?
Magic, you're back,
that was my
Torquil.
internet connection which conked out, I'm afraid.
Ah, fantastic.
Well, I managed to get it back, but what was I saying? What was the last thing you heard me say?
While you were away, Torquil, I explained that under the Article 222, all states are required to be part of this Euro Gendarmerie in effect. They can be invited into a country, but we can't get rid of them once they're here.
Well, that is the point, yes, because as I was trying to say, they once they're in the once they're in the country, they obey. It'll be like an army of occupation. They will only take orders from Brussels, And if our country, if then we have an election and elect 100% UKIP parliament, which says to them, get out, they won't pay any attention. Because they will say, we do not recognize your authority. We only recognize the authority of Brussels. And they will be with their guns and their boots on the ground and their armored personnel carriers and God knows what else, helicopters probably. And, you know, the only way to get them out at that point will be, I'm afraid, that, the whole thing will get really rather messy if they stick to their guns. And the British Army would have to get them out, which, I mean, you know, would be, well, it would all be very, very unpleasant and you know, so it's now the main point here, very important point, in my submission to the House of Lords last year, the last thing I mentioned at the end of my piece was that Dominic Raab, MP, put a question to the Home Office, a parliamentary question. He said, under what circumstances would the government call on the assistance of special intervention units from our European partners? And James Brokenshire, the minister, answered in the name of Theresa May and David Cameron and said, of course we would invite them in if we saw the need. This means that the government is willing to invite in these fellows from Europe with all their armaments, because that would be then the European Gendarmerie. I mean, because they are the special intervention units of France, Italy, Spain, etc. And once they are in Britain, they will not go away simply because they will not recognize the authority of our Queen in Parliament. The only authority they will recognize is Brussels, which claims sovereignty, suzerainty, I think it's called, over our own Queen in Parliament. We are a vassal state in their eyes, and therefore they would not obey an order from our Parliament, an act of Parliament, telling them to leave.
Now,
this statement by the government is absolutely the height of rashness and recklessness, if not worse.
Now, Rodney Atkinson was talking about this very thing about under the Treaty of Maastricht, that the changes to our sovereignty were so dramatic that I think he described, he used the word suzerain and a titular head, where effectively we have a queen that could be arraigned in her own courts under Maastricht and under this European system. So we've lost, you know, the public in Britain. When you go out and speak to people, or, you know, chat to people on a general day-to-day basis, just people in our audience here, most people are under the illusion that we have that, you know, the European Union is largely just a trade club, that it doesn't really have that much power, but in actual fact, it you know, the book and what you're talking about and the other things that we've talked about on this show, the EU has a tremendous amount of power, and I wonder what kind of catalysts might be used to invite such a Euro-genre force into the UK, and do we have any of those on the horizon? I mean, for example, what if we were to start to see terrorist cell activity to do with the Islamic State taking place in UK? Would that warrant an invitation?
It doesn't necessarily need that, though, Rick. The way that the European Union wants to interpret their own laws is any way they want. If we have a riot situation like a couple of years ago when there was a looting in a number of cities, the fact that someone picks up a crowd control barrier and throws it at the police is an armed terrorist, as far as the EU can interpret it. And that, I would believe, would be sufficient for them to come in, because they want to use the law exactly as they want it. Look at the business over saving the euro. They completely overrode Article, is it 122, I believe, that said we weren't allowed to bail out countries. They completely ignored that because it suited them. They set up the mechanism to
The
bolster
European
euro.
Stability Mechanism, the ESM.
That's correct. Yeah. But that's just an example of how they interpret the law the way they want to. And I honestly believe they were going to use this because they use the words terrorist, but they don't define terrorist. They don't define armed terrorists. And I said, if they chose to call a rioter a terrorist, and he picks up a stone or a brick or a Molotov cocktail, they're armed terrorists. And that's sufficient for them to come in. They will interpret the law.
I think they need the permission of our government to do so.
Yeah, but we've already spoken that a puppet government could be put in, couldn't it? They've done it twice already.
Well, in Greece and Italy.
Yes.
Well,
and technocrats in Spain.
Well, yeah, sorry?
And the appointment of technocrats in Spain.
Yes.
Oh.
The thing is, this sounds like conspiracy theory stuff, but it worries me that so much legislation is coming in under the counter, and all to do with crowd control, and giving them the right to use lethal force with impunity. The whole of the EU apparatus gives complete legal immunity to most of the people anyway, but this gives them specific impunity for lethal force. Now, we often agreed that we are already in a de facto state of federalised Europe already. There's just no ones that actually crossed the T's and dotted the I's yet. But we've got MVQ coming next month. The Lisbon Treaty.
Sorry, what is MVQ?
I'm always getting the acronym the wrong way around.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah.
Sorry, what is
the Lisbon Treaty has already given the legal framework. With QMV coming in November, they can completely close the whole thing down. Unless we get out very, very quickly, we may lose the ability to get out. They can repeal Article 50, for instance, and we can't do anything about it because we've got no vetoes anymore, or we won't have when QMV comes in.
Well, yeah, I think the essential point is whose boots are on our ground. I mean, at the end of the day, because that is the power. That is ultimately what determines it. And this is why the statement by James Brokenshire should be publicised and denounced for being so reckless and so, if not worse, so thoughtless and so. It's the height of rashness. I mean, this is the Home Office Minister. He's supposed to be, he and his boss, Theresa May, they're supposed to be keeping the country intact. If they invite in these people who do not really like us and certainly have no time for our traditions, Magna Carta, and all the rest of it, they are asking for trouble.
I wonder how that actually sits with the Treason Act, asking or giving authority for foreign troops to come in to our country and attack British subjects. There must be something specific in the Treason Act against that.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. But but the trouble with using treason, which has been tried already by various people, is that it's been impossible to get the judges and the courts to say that Parliament or the government or the Queen is committing treason, because they feel that their duty is to apply the law, which is defined by the Queen in Parliament. So
that's got to be a law. That's a complete laugh. Over the ECHR, they've been making law, the judges.
Oh well, yes. On some things they do, but on these things, they are obviously under some perhaps constraints. Certainly, I mean, look at that chap in Sunderland, Bruce Morgan, I think his name was, a district judge who convicted the metric martyrs. I mean, that was disgraceful. He said from his bench, the Queen in Parliament is no longer sovereign and hasn't been since 1972, more or less. And, I mean, there he is, on one of Her Majesty's judges saying that she's no longer sovereign. It's absurd. But then the appeal court upheld his sentence, and the House of Lords refused to hear the case.
So to whom does he make his oath of office?
To the Queen. But I think
But the Queen is no longer Queen.
Well, exactly. So yes, indeed. It's.
I mean, it's an extraordinary state of affairs, and you
yes.
know, for me, as an ordinary layperson, I'm a software engineer and a technologist, really, and my involvement has been borne about by coming across the more that I've looked into this the issues around Europe and the different changes, the more wide-eyed I become, and it's just an extraordinary state of affairs that we have got ourselves into such a legal and challenging predicament. And there's a piece of me that wonders how little or how uninformed or ill-informed so many of our political people are, particularly those in office.
It's voting complacency as well, Rick. It's voting complacency. They know what's going on, but they can't be bothered. Well, we're in this position now because of that. And May 2015 is their very last chance to pull our toes out the fire, because we are seriously going to get burnt.
And of course, well, we have a number of things that are taking place on our website at the moment. I mean, we have the e-petition that you set up, Peter, for raising awareness and driving the issue of the JHA and the changes there. We have the e-book that people can download. And of course, for those people who are interested in finding out more about corpus juris and habeas corpus, if you go into the archives of our video library, you can find those videos of Torquil in that debate with Professor Spencer, and find out more about it. Unfortunately, once again, and I with the 1 hour that we have in this show, we always seem to overrun, and I could easily spend another hour just digging into this some more. And I have to say, the information that you have brought to us this evening, Torquil, has been just fascinating. It's been tremendously well informed, and it's been hugely interesting. So thank you very much for spending your time with us.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
And I think we have going to have obviously there's going to be the introduction or the changes to qualified majority voting that's going to take place in November. Of course, the opt-in decision on the European arrest warrant. Am I right in thinking that that is by the 1st of December, Torquil?
Yes. 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 That's the deadline.
So, I mean, I think if you would be willing to read this topic, I think go together and get you back on to talk about this topic some more.
We got some crosstalk there, but
I can't hear you, I'm afraid. Someone's gone wrong.
Oh, okay. Well, what I was basically saying was that I think we would be very interested in revisiting this topic again and exploring it some more with you, if you would be willing to come on and spend some more of your time with us, Torquil, at a future date.
Yes, indeed. You can get in touch, and we'll see. Certainly, we're willing to do that.
Fantastic. So, well, for our audience, of course, out there, do remember to sign up to our newsletter. You can sign up on the website to get our daily news email. Those of you who haven't, or if you have already downloaded the original version, do download the latest updates to the Democracy in a Federalized Europe. Peter, could you take a quick 1 minute to just give us an idea of some of the new items that you've put in that book, in the updated book?
Well, the most significant one is I've moved a reference to Article 222 to its own chapter. I'm just having a quick look down. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
So what to say? I mean, in that book you'll find a lot of information that you really need to know about the changes that are taking place, all put together really succinctly, and everything that's in the book is cross-referenced and linked, so you can go and research it for yourselves and find the information that supports it on the web.
Yeah, none of it is conjecture. Well, there's some conjecture there on my part, but I think it's qualified in as much as we've had experience of how the EU operates, and I've merely made comment upon my personal belief of what might happen given the occurrence of this legislation coming through. It worries me very, very deeply that so much legislation on the control of people is coming through, and it's coming through surreptitiously. We've just spoken about it, but it worries me greatly, and I seriously believe that if we, as a country, do not stop it within the next year, we are going to end up under the full thrall of the European Parliament. Not the Parliament, the Commission, which is becoming more and more like a Politburo. And that's not conspiracy theory. The way they are setting themselves up is exactly the same model as the old Soviet one.
And Torquil, any final thoughts from you on the future of Europe and Britain's involvement in it going forward over the next 12 months, things we ought to be paying attention to prior to this election in May?
Well, I think tomorrow, if there are any listeners in Clacton or the place, I can't remember the name of it, Haywood, is it? And Middleton,
yes.
where there are by-elections with UKIP candidates. Anybody who, I mean, if we get one or possibly two members of Parliament from the UKIP party in Parliament by Friday, and there will be another chance on November the 6th when there's the by-election where Mark Reckless will be standing for UKIP. Then I think that, you know, there is some hope that because it will be much harder for the media to sort of airbrush out the message from UKIP and the warnings of what is about to happen. And there is a pretty good chance that there will be a that if UKIP gets a balance of power number of seats in May next year, that therefore it will be able to force a referendum and also take part in the management of a referendum, which is very important, because if a referendum is held under the present coalition government, it will be clearly doctored, and if it goes the wrong way, they'll tell us to have it again, like they did in Ireland and Denmark, I think it was, when they gave the wrong answer.
Yeah. At this point, it might be worth pointing out, Torquil, that we are not actually a political site as such. Whereas it may be laudable for a breakdown of the existing parliament, we do not openly promote any particular party, but leave it up to people to decide for themselves.
Well, yes, okay.
No, that's quite right, and I think that you know, in summary, what I would say here is that, you know, perhaps, possibly even never before in our history in Britain have we been at such a political critical point where information and knowledge about what is being proposed and the changes that are being put forward is so important for people to know about. And that's what you know, our task here at the unit is to do, is to draw together into one single place everything that you as an audience need to know about the European Union, the directives and the legislation that it is proposing, and how that all affects you. With that information in your hands, then you should be able to go out and make an informed choice about how you want to dispense your vote and what political direction you want to go in.
I see, yes. Okay. But you know, let us say that if there is if the Parliament that emerges from May is the same as the Parliament that we have now, then I think you know, the outlook is rather dire, definitely. But it will be very interesting to see the debate on the European arrest warrant, which will be taking place during the next month, or certainly by the end of November. Whether the government will try to, because there are 100 backbenchers who don't want the European arrest warrant, will vote against it. Most of them are Tory, and it'll be very interesting to see if the government tries to crush this rebellion by using not only Lib Dem votes but also Labour votes. And it will also be interesting to see if they have the gall to use to make it a confidence vote, to try and force all their MPs to vote in favour of it. Because for the government to stake its confidence on the handing over of the power to arrest people to foreign bodies would be something quite remarkable.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold thing to do. Well, certainly we're going to be tracking that news and information here on our website, both in terms of its domestic context, so what that means here for impacting us in the UK, and we have our UK impact section and our Parliament section that will cover the news on that. Of course, we'll also be pulling the news on how that's being interpreted and how that's being viewed in Europe as well. So we'll be following that debate and providing the news and information on it. To all of our audience, thank you very much for joining us this evening. This information that we've put together about the JHA, the European arrest warrant, and all of these articles, really, you know, dissemination of this information and communicating it around your friends and your colleagues and getting them to come to our side, come and look at the news, come and watch these videos, come and visit our video library and see the debate videos with Torquil. Be informed, get that information and share it with as many people as you possibly can, because this is critical information in the decision-making process that we're all going to be asked to make through these by-elections and into the general election next year. It just remains me to once again thank our guest, Torquil Dick-Erikson. Thank you ever so much for being with us this evening, and we really hope that you'll be able to visit us again. Thank you ever so much, Torquil.
It's been a pleasure.
And of course to my co-host and my colleague who's been working so closely with me and putting in a huge amount of effort. And I must say to the community out there, you know, that this site is now community run by the community. It's funded by you, the viewers, and our people out there. And the efforts that Peter puts in are all done voluntarily in, you know, maintaining the website. And as you've been working alongside with me, and you've been doing such a sterling job, Peter. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you very much for all of your efforts and for joining me this evening.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rick. Just one quick follow-on from what you said. This site should not exist. It's the duty of politicians to tell the people what we are doing, but they refuse to do it. And that is the only reason that we exist. But it's a labour of love, because I love my country and I want it to carry on as it's in its own sovereignty. And I will do everything that I can to promote that.
Understood. Thanks very much, Peter. So to our viewers out there, you know what to do. Spread the word, tell your friends and colleagues about theunituk.com, share our emails, share our tweets, share our postings on Facebook, join us on our Google Plus community, follow us on YouTube, and visit our website. It just remains for me to say thank you for joining us on Table Talk Live. I'll see you soon.
Good night.